Her name was Margita. She was nearly 40 years old, born in Košice, and she had spent 16 years in New York working as a maid and companion for a wealthy American banker, building a life far from home. She saved, she planned, and in March 1926, she came back to Czechoslovakia, to the mountains she had grown up knowing, to the country she still believed in. She came back with money. She came back with hope. She never left the mountains alive. 3 men were tried for her death. One of them insisted, until the day he died, that he was innocent. Whether that insistence was justice speaking, or the last performance of a man who could never stop acting, is a question this story cannot answer. But it can ask it, properly, for the first time. Welcome to Cold Block. The first Czechoslovak Republic, founded in October 1918, was, by any measure, one of the most optimistic democratic experiments of the interwar period. Prague, in the 1920s, was a city that believed in itself. A city of literary cafes, progressive politics, avant-garde art, and the particular swagger of a generation that had survived a world war and decided they were the ones who would finally do modernity right. In this world, talent was currency. The right literary circle, the right editorial connections, the right table at the right café on Národní třída. These things mattered enormously. They were the ladder. And for a young, ambitious, genuinely gifted man like Jan Klepetář, the ladder was everything. Before we meet the men, we meet the woman they took from the world. Margita Vörösmartyová was a Slovak woman of Hungarian origin who had made something of herself on her own terms, in a foreign country, without the connections or advantages that made life easier for men like those about to enter her life. She came back to Czechoslovakia with enough money to begin a new chapter, and with, by all accounts, a desire to find a companion, a home, a future. That desire would be used against her with cold precision. Now, meet the men. Jan Klepetář was, by any honest accounting, one of the most promising young writers of his generation. Born in 1902, he contributed to literary journals, studied medicine at Charles University, and completed his doctorate. Ferdinand Peroutka, the most respected journalist in Czechoslovakia, wrote the preface to one of his books. He was identified by serious critics as a writer from whom something real could be expected. Jan Michalko was something else entirely. A Slovak journalist and self-styled nationalist from Vážeč, he had a particular talent for identifying wealthy women, manufacturing emotional intimacy, and extracting their money. He was charming. He was convincing. He was, by the time he crossed paths with Klepetář in the nocturnal circuits of Prague's bars, already an experienced confidence artist. Mikuláš Sikorský was Michalko's companion and accomplice, a journalist and occasional union official who moved in the same circles. These 3 men, a gifted literary doctor, a con artist, and a functionary, found each other in the darkness of Prague's nightlife. What happened next would destroy all of them, in different ways and for different reasons. Michalko's scheme was not complicated. It was simply cruel. He identified Margita as his next target. He cultivated her affection. He made her believe she was going to be married. And then, to make the fantasy complete, to create a ceremony she would believe was real, he needed someone who could play a registrar. Jan Klepetář played the registrar. In the quiet, dignified rooms of the Czech Writers' Society, MAI, in Prague, Klepetář stood before Margita Vörösmartyová wearing a tricolor sash. He performed a legally invalid, deliberately fraudulent wedding ceremony, joining her to a man who had selected her specifically because she was alone, hopeful, and wealthy. Whatever he told himself about this, that it was a prank, that it was harmless, that it was just a role to play for a friend, he knew it was a lie designed to trap a woman. This is not in dispute. He has never disputed it. What is disputed is everything that came after. According to the prosecution's account, confirmed by the confessions of Michalko and Sikorský, on July 15, 1926, the group traveled by train to Slovakia, to the High Tatras, to the area around Strbské pleso, one of the most beautiful mountain landscapes in Central Europe. Margita Vörösmartyová was murdered there. She was drugged with aspirin powder and strangled. Her body was buried in the forests by the Bílý Vá River. The three men then used her money for a life of luxury. Jan Klepetář told the court he was not there, that he had been in Prague for the entire duration, that whatever Michalko and Sikorský had done, he had no part in it. He had made a terrible mistake with the fake wedding. He knew that, but he was not a murderer. The witnesses who testified against him told a different story. Margita had a family. A mother who wrote letters, a family that eventually noticed that the letters coming back from Paris had changed. The handwriting different, the voice different. The mounting anxiety of people who knew something was wrong before they could prove it. Her family filed a criminal complaint. Slowly, the investigation tightened around the three men. When the evidence collapsed around them, Michalko and Sikorský broke. They confessed to the killing, and they named Klepetář as a participant. For Klepetář, the arrest was the beginning of a process he would spend the rest of his life trying to undo. The trial opened in February 1928 and became a national sensation. Newspapers carried daily reports from the courtroom. More than 10,000 people formally requested entry. In the dock, Klepetář was composed, articulate, and consistent. He did not deny the fake wedding. He denied the murder. He had an alibi, his mistress and friends who placed him in Prague. The prosecution had its own witnesses, who placed him on the train to Slovakia. The court believed the prosecution. But there was a second dimension to this trial that went beyond the facts of one woman's death. The conservative Czech press used the trial as evidence of everything they believed was wrong with the new republic's bohemian intelligentsia, the literary cafes, the rejection of traditional morality. They called it, derisively, the Klepetář generation. The socialist paper Hlas lidu captured the cultural horror perfectly, reporting that after the murder, as they left the body, one of the men allegedly remarked, "To je psina, kluci." That's a laugh, boys. A gifted young doctor and writer, caught in a murder conspiracy that had begun in bars and ended in a mountain grave. What better proof, critics said, of where all that modern freedom led? Whether this framing was honest, or whether it was a cultural scapegoating of an entire generation using one man as its symbol, is a question that historians have never fully settled. The verdicts were read to a dead, silent courtroom. Michalko received the death sentence, later commuted to 20 years. Sikorský received 15 years. Klepetář received life imprisonment, later commuted. He was 25 years old. Inside, Klepetář did not waste time. He learned languages. He studied. He applied repeatedly for retrial. He maintained in every document and every letter that he had been wrongly convicted. In 1937, he was conditionally released under a presidential amnesty. He walked out of prison and immediately began the process of becoming someone else, legally. He changed his name. Jan Klepetář ceased to exist on paper. He became Jan Karsten. He found work at the Melantric publishing house. He translated. He kept his head down. He did not stop. Here is what we cannot resolve, and what this video will not pretend to resolve. Jan Klepetář participated in a scheme to defraud a vulnerable woman of her money and her dignity. That is not in dispute. Whether he then participated in her murder, whether he was present in the High Tatras when Margita Vörösmartyová was killed, remains, forensically and historically, an open question. The witnesses on both sides of the argument had reasons to lie. The confessions of his co-defendants cannot be taken as independently corroborated truth. A modern court, operating under modern evidentiary standards, might well have reached a different conclusion. But criminal psychology offers a parallel question that is perhaps more uncomfortable. Even if he was in Prague when she died, does that mean he bears no responsibility? He set the trap. He wore the collar. He performed the ceremony that convinced her she was loved, so that she could be led more easily to wherever the plan required her to go. The forensic and criminological literature on complicity is clear on one thing. The person who creates the conditions for a crime does not escape moral accountability simply by not being in the room when the final act occurs. Whether Jan Klepetář was a wrongly convicted man or a man who understood exactly what he had set in motion, that question cannot be answered here. What can be said is this: a brilliant, socially ambitious young man who had every reason to know better looked into the eyes of a lonely woman and chose to deceive her for the benefit of a man he knew to be dangerous. The High Tatras did the rest. After the war, the world had changed too much to go back. In 1949, after the communist coup, Klepetář, Jan Karsten, left Czechoslovakia. First Sweden, then West Germany. He took on a new role, a new name again, Jan Janeček, writing for the Czech exile literary community. He studied psychiatry in Switzerland. He practiced medicine. He built, piece by piece, a life that looked from the outside like a man who had moved forward. He had not moved forward. He had been waiting. In 1964, he emigrated to the United States. In 1974, he returned to Czechoslovakia as an American citizen, using his U.S. passport as a form of protection, and walked back into Prague for the first time in decades with a single goal: to reopen the trial. His defense lawyer was Otakar Motejl, a man who would later become one of the most respected legal minds in post-communist Czech history, the country's first ombudsman. The retrial was never granted. What the mountains at Štrbské Pleso know, if the mountains know anything, they have not shared. Margita Vörösmartyova's family never received a satisfactory accounting of what happened to her in those mountains. The confessions of Michalko and Sikorský gave them a version of events, but not justice, not in any full sense of the word. She had come home to begin again. She became, instead, a case file. The case entered Czech cultural history as a contested symbol, used by different generations for different arguments about intelligence and morality, about the interwar republic's freedoms and their costs, about what the justice system can and cannot prove. Otakar Moteo, the lawyer who tried and failed to reopen Klepetář's case, went on to become one of the architects of the post-1989 Czech justice system. The case he could not reopen became, in its way, part of the long argument Czech society was always going to have with itself about truth, guilt, and the limits of what courts can know. The mountains have not changed. Štrbské pleso is still there, still cold, still silver, still beautiful. Some places carry what happened in them without showing a trace. Jan Klepetář left one question, one trial, one woman. The next man on this channel left a different kind of record. Bohemia, 1870. A robber, a murderer, a man who killed, by the best accounts, at least 3 people in rapid succession, one after another, without apparent pause or remorse. The kind of case that terrorized the roads of Western Bohemia and filled every newspaper in the empire with breathless dispatches, because nothing quite like it had been seen in the country before. And then, when it was over, when he had been caught and condemned and brought to the scaffold, the empire made a decision. They made it public. Jan Janeček was the last person publicly executed in the Czech lands. Plzeň, September 9th, 1871. The rope, more than 15,000 people in a field outside the city. The end of an era, and nobody quite knew it yet.